Am I completely wrong? I'm completely wrong. Okay, never mind. Cut that whole part. Cut that whole part because I am wrong. We're off to a good start.
I've been going to some dark places. I hate it when my mind races. I've got so many.
So, hello and welcome back. It has been quite some time since the last time we did Heartstopper Comics vs. Show, so I thought it is probably a good idea to get back to it. So, here we are, getting back to it. And it has in fact been so long that I completely forget what we did last time. So if I repeat anything, hopefully you also have forgotten what happened last time. So yeah, we'll work on that together and hopefully it'll be good. But I did briefly review the previous video, and I know the last scene we looked at was where Nick and Charlie fall asleep holding hands in the hotel room in Paris. So that is where we stopped. But I forgot to introduce Heartstopper Comics vs. Show, which you probably know what it is if you're watching this video, but just in case you don't, Heartstopper Comics vs. Show is where we look at the Heartstopper comics, and we look at the Heartstopper show, and we compare them. So, probably obvious, but, you know, I gotta say it, it's a thing. So let's talk about the structure of how this part goes in the comics versus the show. In the comics, we have the gang heads off to Paris. They arrive at their hotel room. We have the whole thing with Tao and, in the comics, Aled end up splitting up Nick and Charlie, not letting them sleep in the same bed. Of course, in the show, it's Isaac. And then Nick and Charlie have a conversation about wanting to do it, meaning share a bed in this case. Cuteness ensues. They're kissing. Darcy walks in. Oh, you're being gay. Good job. Carry on. Classic. And then immediately after that, we jump to kind of a montage scene where they're having dinner, and then right into them falling asleep holding hands in the hotel room. But in the show, they arrive in Paris, they get to their hotel room, and then they go out sightseeing. Wait, no, they don't. Am I completely wrong? I'm completely wrong. Okay, never mind. Cut that whole part. Cut that whole part because I am wrong. It does happen in the same order. So yeah, we're off to a good start. Let me get a drink of water. Maybe hydration will help me. So last time in Comics vs. Show, we were looking at episode 4, Challenge. And we had gotten to the part in the comics and the show where the gang had arrived in Paris. Nick and Charlie had unfortunately been relegated to separate beds, and they spent the night holding hands across the way. Very adorable, even though, we talked about this last time, but the logic in the show verse doesn't make as much sense because in the comics, Tao does not know that Nick and Charlie are a couple. So he wants to keep them separated because he thinks Charlie's suffering from an unrequited crush, and that having to share a bed with Nick would make Charlie really uncomfortable. Whereas in the show, Tao has the same logic, but he knows that they're a couple. So that was one of the things that we talked about. One of the changes that maybe didn't work quite as well, but still, it's fine. It still kind of worked. So now, let's continue. So Nick and Charlie fall asleep, holding hands. It's very beautiful. When we cut to the next morning, Charlie has curled up. They're no longer holding hands. Charlie has curled into himself, but Nick's hand is still extended, which I said this last time, but I love that detail so much. It's so Nick to be just still reaching out for Charlie, and so Charlie to be kind of curling in on himself. So anyway, so they are awakened by a knock 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 on the door. Charlie gets up and is like, huh? And Tao also sits up kind of sleepy-eyed, and we have echoes from outside the room. Are you guys awake yet? It's nearly time to go for... And Tao's pulling on a sweatshirt, I'll get it, and sleepily opens the door. And it's Elle, and she says, breakfast. Because Tao is there, and while he is pulled on a sweatshirt, he is not bothered to zip it. So we see Tao's chest on full display, and Elle looks very blushy and uncomfortable, and Tao goes full red and just slams the door. And it's it's Elle. And Nick and Charlie are just staring at him dot dot dot. And Elle through the door is we'll meet you down there then. And Tao's oh, okay, really clutching the sweatshirt to himself. Now, when we see this happen in the show, it's actually in the next episode because, and I think that was a good choice. Like they have this scene in the show happen right after the love bite is discovered. It's a good explanation as to why Tao flings open the door with his shirt off without thinking about it. Like in the comics, it works too because he's half asleep. He's like, what's going on? But in the show, it works very well because he's just been chewing out Nick for daring to leave visible evidence of his and Charlie's amorous endeavors on Charlie's neck, and then just kind of stomps over the door and pulls it open without thinking, and Elle is there.
You! I cannot believe it! The actual... We will be having words.
And another difference is that Elle in the show looks a lot more amused and less embarrassed by the situation, whereas Tao in the comics and the show is just full on embarrassed. Like in the comics, Elle is kind of like, oh my god, oh wow. Whereas in the show, she's just like, she just kind of looks at him and laughs a little bit. Okay, so in the show, Tao is like standing against the door, like covering his bare chest, and he's like, help me.
Help me! Please!
Which a bit dramatic, but he's Tao, so. Whereas here, like he comes over to his and Charlie's bed and just sinks down onto it, and Charlie's like, Tao, and then Tao just quietly is like, help me. And Charlie says, look, Tao, Elle likes you back. And Tao says, what? No, she doesn't. And looks really like blushy and annoyed. And Charlie says, she does. I promise you she does. And Tao's like, that's stupid. You're just trying to make me feel better. I'm going in the shower. And Nick and Charlie exchange glances, and Nick's like, And Aled has slept through this whole thing, which, good for you, Aled. I respect and envy those who are able to sleep through anything because I am an extremely light sleeper, and I will wake up like if a butterfly flaps its wings 3 states over. So, very good for me living in a studio apartment with 2 cats. So, of course, in the show, this is where we cut to the opening title sequence. But in the comics, right after this, we go to everybody's first day exploring Paris, which of course takes place in the show in episode 4. We're jumping around a little bit, but I do think it makes sense in both cases. So we have Mr. Ajayi talking to the assembled students next to the bus, saying, okay, gang, this afternoon you're going to be exploring Montmartre by yourselves for a couple of hours. There are lots of shops and places to visit, like the Sacré-Cœur Church and the Musée du Montmartre. And Mr. Farouk says, that's museum for all the students on this trip who don't even take French.
Okay, gang, today you get to explore Montmartre. There are lots of shops and places to visit, like the Sacré-Cœur Church, the Musée de Montmartre.
That's museum for everyone on this trip who doesn't even take French.
And Mr. Ajayi is like, meet back here at 5 p.m., please. You have our phone numbers if you get lost. Have fun. And Mr. Farouk says, and stay in your groups. And then we have this epic shot of our gang heading off. Nick and Charlie in the front, followed by Tara and Darcy, followed by Sahar and Elle, and then Aled and Tao bringing up the rear. Oh, and another thing I wanted to say about differences between the comics and the show is that in the show, right after Tao slams the door in Elle's face, he says, help me, and then there's laughter, and then we cut to the title sequence. So we don't have this scene where Charlie is trying to assure Tao that Elle likes him, and he's like, no. Whereas, like, in the show, of course, we've had Tao confessing to Elle, and them having an epically bad first date, and kind of being on really awkward terms at this point. So the mood is a little bit different between Tao and Elle, and that becomes very apparent when we get to what happens next, which is Tao and Elle going off to a museum together while the rest of the gang goes somewhere else. But we'll get to that in a moment. The gang heads off to explore Paris, and we are left with Mr. Farouk and Mr. Ajayi, and Mr. Farouk, his iconic line, I need a drink, an alcoholic drink. And Mr. Ajayi is like, we probably shouldn't drink alcohol. And Mr. Farouk says, I need a croissant then.
I need a drink, an alcoholic drink.
We probably shouldn't drink alcohol.
I need a croissant then.
So, we have the gang heading through the streets of Paris, and Nick is like, "So, what's the plan?" And Tao and Elle at the same time say, "The Musée du Montmartre?" And Alid kind of looks away, smiling, like,
What's the plan?
What about the museum?
and Tao and Elle look at each other and blush. There's a lot more like shy blushing between Tao and Elle in the comics, especially because, again, neither of them have confessed their feelings to the other at this point, so neither of them have confirmation that the other one likes them. So we have Darcy saying, "Well, I'm not really into museums," and Tara being like, "Yeah, I kind of just wanted to wander around." And Charlie says, "We need to go to the Sacré-Cœur at least." And Nick says, "And get some food." And I know I said this in my reaction to the comics just on their own, but like, Nick Nelson, yes. That would be me in Paris or any other place. Food, number one priority at all times. Elle is like, but Renoir painted there. And Tao says, "It's a really important place in art history." Yeah. And Tara is like, "Why don't you two go together?"
I don't know, I think museums are kind of boring.
Yeah, it would be nice to just explore. Renoir painted that.
Yeah, it's a really important place in art history.
Why don't you two go together then?
And Charlie says, "Yeah, we can meet you in like an hour." And Elle like tucks her hair behind her ear. And Tao's like, "Just us two?"
We can meet you in a couple of hours.
Just us?
Sure.
And they look at each other and smile. And Elle says, "Well, we do both want to go." And Tao says, "Yeah, we should do it." And off they go. Now, in the show, we have a lovely moment where it's kind of confirmed that the gang did this on purpose, that they were trying to get Tao and Elle to go off together alone.
Mischief maker. I've influenced you.
Whereas here, we don't really have that scene. But, you know, clearly no one is upset about them going off. Oh my god, I'm sleepy. Did I mention that? Okay, and this is where we get introduced to Sahar. So Darcy says, "This is Sahar, by the way." And Sahar says, "Hi." And Tara says, "She's sharing our room." Yeah, so in the show, Sahar meets them through planning for the prom. I mean, clearly they've met before because they're in the same class, but like, she is introduced to us as the person in charge of planning the prom. Whereas in the comics here, this is the first time she's really introduced to us. So it seems like she's just been randomly assigned to room with Tara and Darcy and Elle. So then we see Tao and Elle at the Musée de Montmartre. We have Nick and Charlie looking at postcards while Darcy has a really tacky I Love Paris sweatshirt that Tara also apparently thinks is tacky. And we have Tao and Elle together looking at paintings, and Nick and Charlie kind of brushing fingertips, and Tao and Elle kind of brushing shoulders, and just a nice little montage here. I do really like what they did with this scene in the show, where first of all, they use it to show that Tao and Elle genuinely are really suited for each other and have a great time together when they're not stressed out and like focused on making it a good date. The time that they spend together at the museum just makes it really apparent that the only thing standing in their way when they went on the movie date was that they were putting so much pressure on themselves. Tao especially was putting so much pressure on himself and trying to be someone else. I also love that the show used this part to show that Charlie is jealous of Tara and Darcy for being out. That moment when we see Nick and Charlie browsing postcards, and Charlie is seeing Tara and Darcy being really lovey-dovey together, and then he's kind of looking at his hand next to Nick's and thinking like, oh, what if I just grabbed his hand or something? And Nick doesn't notice that any of this is going on, but clearly it's really affected Charlie. He's understandably sad about that. Like, he wants to be able to hold his boyfriend's hand and be open about the love that he feels for him, and it sucks that he can't do that. So I really like how they used the sequence in the show. I think they really used it to the maximum here. So then we move into sitting on the steps, and Darcy's like, man, I am so hungry. Anyone want to come get ice cream? And Nick's like, yeah, I want one. And Alid raises his hand, me. And then at this point in the comics, we get a trigger warning because we're about to venture into some signs of Charlie's eating disorder. Tara and Charlie are chatting, and Nick crouches down beside Charlie and is like, Char, do you want an ice cream? Charlie's like, oh, nah, I'm still kind of full from lunch. And Nick says, but you barely ate any lunch though. And Charlie like looks really upset and is like, what? Yeah, I did. And then calms down a bit and smiles a little like, I mean, I'm fine, Nick, honestly. And Nick's like, okay. I think Charlie's reaction here is it's interesting how strong and defensive it is, which really matches up, obviously, with someone who's trying to hide the fact that they're not eating from the important people in their life. But Nick, being an avid Charlie observer, has of course noticed the fact that Charlie is not eating much. Now, in the show, this happens a little differently, where Nick actually has the ice cream when they have this conversation.
I'm still full from breakfast.
So you didn't eat that much breakfast?
Yeah, I did.
So it's a little bit different, but I do think it makes sense to do it this way as well. So then Nick stands up and Darcy's like, we'll meet you back here. And Tara says, okay. It's clear that Nick is a little more concerned because he's talking to Aled and he says, hey, Aled, have you noticed that Charlie doesn't really eat much? And Aled's like, what do you mean? And meanwhile, Darcy is consulting the GPS on her phone. She and Sahar are trying to figure out where the ice cream place is. And Nick says, I don't know. He never finishes any meals and he never eats snacks. And Aled says, oh, I don't know. I don't think I've noticed. And Nick says, oh. And Aled says, why? Are you worried about it? And it is really interesting to me that, like, no one has noticed except for Nick. It makes sense because it's not necessarily the kind of thing you would be watching out for, and someone like Charlie is a pro at hiding the fact that he's not eating. Like, he's always ready with like I had a big lunch, or oh, I ate at home, or it just comes so naturally to him. I think Charlie is not someone who lies about frivolous things, that his friends are probably used to him telling the truth. So if he tells them, oh, I ate earlier, or, blah, 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 they have no reason to doubt him. And they're just, they're probably just not paying that much attention to how much food he's eating. But Nick, as someone who is like literally obsessed with Charlie, of course he's going to be paying attention. Of course he's going to notice. Given Charlie's very strong reaction when Nick calls him on it, I get why Nick is asking Aled these questions at this point. So Aled says he doesn't think he's noticed, and Nick is like, oh. And Aled says, why? Are you worried about it? And Nick says, I don't know, maybe a little bit. I know he's naturally on the skinny side, but I don't know. And Aled says, you should ask him about it if you're worried. And Nick says, yeah, maybe. And then it's here. They found the ice cream place. And here we have a beautiful moment. So the ice cream person is like, oui, monsieur. And Nick says, combien pour deux boules de glace? And I apologize, as always, for my French. And the guy says, 5 euros. And Nick says, ah, alors, je pourrais avoir 2 boules de glace, s'il vous plaît. And the guy says, quel parfum? And Nick says, au chocolat et à la vanille. And the guy says, d'accord, vous êtes anglaise? And Nick says, oui. He says, c'est pas vrai, votre accent est incroyable. And Nick says, ah, merci. Essentially, Nick is like, how much are 2 scoops of ice cream? It's 5 euros. And Nick is like, okay, well, can I get 2 scoops of ice cream, please? What flavor? Chocolate and vanilla. Okay, are you English? Yes. That can't be true. Your accent is incredible. Oh, thank you.
Est-ce que je pourrais avoir 2 bulles de glace au chocolat, s'il vous plaît?
Ah oui, bien sûr. Mais attendez, vous êtes anglais?
Oui, je suis en voyage scolaire.
C'est dingue, vous avez pas d'accent, c'est fou, bravo, bravo.
Ah, merci.
So we have Darcy in the background going, oh my god, since when could you speak French like an actual French person? And Nick's like, oh, my dad is French. And Darcy says, since when? And Nick says, since his birth?
Since when could you speak French like an actual French person?
Oh, my dad's French.
Since when?
Since his birth?
Yeah, I love this scene so much, and I'm so glad that we got to see it in the show. It was one of my top scenes that I was hoping we would get in the show. Meanwhile, Charlie is taking pictures and looking at his pictures, and Tara says, so, how are things with you and Nick? And Charlie's like, oh, really good. Haha, sometimes I still can't believe he's actually my boyfriend. And Tara says, really? Why? And Charlie says, I don't know, there was a time when I was super jealous of you because I thought you and Nick might, And Tara just bursts out laughing and says, there's no way that would ever have happened. Aside from the fact that I am absolutely not into guys, Nick's so in love with you, it's a little unbearable to watch sometimes.
How are things between you and Nick?
Pretty good. Why? Does it look like we're not okay?
It looks like Nick is so in love with you. It's a bit unbearable to watch sometimes.
And Charlie immediately blushes and is like, you think so? And Tara's like, you don't? And Charlie laughs and then changes the subject and is like, how did you and Darcy get over the fear of people knowing you're together? And Tara says, it took time.
I suppose I'm sort of jealous of you and Darcy. You're out and you can hold hands and kiss, and I really want that. But I don't want Nick to get bullied like I was.
Takes time.
And by the way, in the show and in the comics, I love that we get to see Charlie and Tara talking. It's very cool to see them chatting about this. Tara says, Darcy was already out. We'd been dating for a while and most of our friends knew, but other people were starting to guess too. At our school, lesbian was used as an insult all the time. I probably even used it once or twice when I was younger. We were terrified.
It took ages for me to even feel comfortable calling myself a lesbian. And we were so scared of what people might say at school, so we didn't tell anyone about us for months.
It took me a long time to even feel comfortable calling myself a lesbian. And for a while, we thought it'd be easier to pretend we're just friends. I guess for a while it was easier, but in time we got more comfortable being us. We reached the point where we knew that whatever people said or thought about us, we knew who we were, and we loved ourselves anyway.
Eventually, we stopped caring about all those people. We just realised me and her were all that mattered. You and Nick will get to that point.
And Charlie asks, so how did you tell people? And Tara says, we didn't really. We just stopped hiding anything and changed our relationship status. Charlie laughs. So this, of course, is a bit of a change between the show and the comics, because in the comics, we have Tara explaining about her and Darcy coming out, whereas in the show, we actually get to see it. And we have Tara, instead of being an established queer person from the start who has been out for a while, like she is in the comics, we get to see her journey a bit more. They come out and suddenly people know that she's queer and how they react. And like, I love that we got to see that. So I think they made a really good choice in the show to have that actively happen throughout the course of the show rather than being something that happened before the events of the show that we were just told about. So very, very good choice there in terms of storytelling for the show. So Tara says, are you worried about you and Nick being out to people? And Charlie says, yeah, I don't want him to get bullied like I did. And Tara says, well, that's always a risk. And yeah, sometimes staying closeted is safer. And Charlie just kind of runs his fingers through his hair. And Tara's like, this is stressing you out a lot, isn't it? And Charlie looks kind of scared and looks over at her. I don't want him to feel like he needs to be out just because I'm out. And Tara says, but do you want to be out as a couple? Yeah. And does he? And Charlie says, well, he said he does. And Tara says, so maybe you should just let it happen. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic announcement. You can just be you. And if it goes badly, well, you can deal with it together. And at that moment, Darcy returns saying, so absolute disaster, Jonesy. They didn't have any mint chocolate left, so I got a strawberry. Tara leans in and kisses Darcy. Darcy's like, and Charlie just smiles in the background. I also wanted to mention one thing we also don't get in the comics is Tara admitting that she is kind of jealous of Charlie and Nick's relationship too, because they share their feelings and Darcy always turns everything into a joke, all that.
I'm jealous of you and Nick in some ways too.
What? Why?
You both talk about your feelings. Darcy just makes everything into a joke. I said I love you to her last week and she didn't say it back. Maybe she didn't even want to.
I'm sure she does want to.
I really like that they gave us this in the show and that we got to see that even a seemingly perfect established relationship like Tara and Darcy still have things they have to talk through, things they have to work through. There's no relationship that is free of problems.
Absolute disaster! Jonesy, they're out of mint chocolate chips, so I had to get a strawberry.
And then Nick arrives, and in the comics, he comes back with what he ordered, which is a singular ice cream cone with 2 scoops. But in the show, he says the same thing in French, but comes back with 2 ice cream cones. So maybe he ordered the ice cream first and then got another one for Charlie, but I think they're both single scoops. So I'm not sure what is meant to have happened there, but it's fine. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so Nick sits down. He says, hey. Charlie says, hey. I'm sure Charlie looks a bit blushy, probably both because he kind of flipped out on Nick earlier and also because he and Tara have just been talking about Nick. And Nick, looking a little bit blushy as well, says, do you want a lick of my ice cream? And then he says, oh my God, that sounded really sexual for some reason. And Charlie laughs very cutely. And then he takes the ice cream and licks it and says, not bad.
Chocolate, not bubble gum.
Oh, you're a good influence on me.
It's not bad.
And I think it's interesting because in the show, it looks like Charlie takes the ice cream specifically so Nick won't be suspicious.
So you didn't eat that much breakfast?
Yeah, I did.
Whereas here, you could, yeah, you could. Whereas here in the comics, you could take the interpretation that by talking about his worries with Tara, it has lowered his stress level a little. And so he's feeling more up to eating a little bit. Now, he doesn't eat a lot, but he's feeling more up to, like, you know, because I'm sure it helped him having Tara to talk to about this and getting out his worries. So you could interpret it either way, but nonetheless, in both situations, we get Charlie with some ice cream on his nose and Nick just looking at him with this immensely fond expression, saying, haha, you got some on your nose, and wiping it off. And then they're discreetly holding hands on the steps.
You got some on your nose. Oh. Let me get that. A bit more. There we go.
And then they catch up with Tao and Elle, and Darcy says, oh my god, do you think anything happened? And Charlie says, I hope so, or Tao is gonna pine to death.
How did it go? Fine. We're totally back to normal.
It was fun. It was really fun.
And that's it.
We're just friends again.
As if. No.
And then we jump to later that night, and Aled says, anyone want anything from the vending machine? Tao, who is sitting on the bed with his legs crossed, says, nah. And Charlie's like, no thanks, I'm going in the shower. And Nick says, I'm okay, thanks. So Charlie's in the shower, Aled heads off to get something from the vending machine, and we have Nick and Tao alone. And so Tao is lost in thought, and Nick's like, hey Tao, how'd it go with Elle today? And Tao's like, and looks really like put on the spot and folds his arm and is like, it was fine. And Nick says, so did anything happen? And Tao's like, no, what was supposed to happen? Nothing happened. And Nick's like, okay. And there's a ... Tao looking very embarrassed. And then Tao says, we just walked around the museum for a bit. It was nice.
How'd it go with Elle today?
It was fine. We just walked around the museum for a bit. It was nice.
And Nick says, okay, but have you considered telling her how you feel? And Tao's like, you don't get it. Elle is literally the most amazing person in the world. She's been through so much shit. Like, I was her friend when she came out as trans, and that was not a fun time for her. She's been through all that, and now she's finally enjoying herself with new friends at a new school. The last thing she needs is me throwing a curveball and messing up our friendship. And Nick says, but what about what she wants? Sometimes it's worth taking a risk. And Tao says, why would she ever like someone like me anyway? She's so cool and interesting and beautiful, and I'm just me. And Nick's like, Tao. And Tao's like, I'm going to the vending machine. And he walks off.
Well, I always thought you two would be good together, so.
You don't get it. Elle is literally the most amazing person in the world. She's gone through so much shit. I was her friend when she came out as trans, and that was not a fun time for her. Why would she ever like me anyway? She's so cool and interesting and beautiful, and I'm just me, you know?
Based on what's happened and not happened, this scene makes sense. Like, they don't have as rocky of a relationship in the comics as they do in the show at this point. But Tao is still really defensive about Elle because he has not asked her out. They have not gone on a date. He doesn't have any idea how she feels. And I love that they used this this is one of my favorite moments in the show. I really like the Nick and Tao moments, especially in season 2. Like, obviously season 1 as well. We get them at the bowling alley together. We get them having that very important conversation in season 8 at the picnic tables. But season 2, like, it's just wonderful seeing the progression of their solo scenes, because we have episode 1 where Nick is like, will that be weird for you with Elle going off to art school? And Tao flips out on him completely. And then we jump to Nick and Tao on the bus being very awkward and quiet together, but having a little bit of conversation about the fact that Nick speaks French. And then we have this scene, which I love so much in the show. Like, Nick using this opportunity to tell Tao what he thinks of him and how cool he thinks Tao is. And, like, I think this is really the first time that Tao realizes that Nick actually likes him.
I think you're pretty cool too, and interesting.
But not beautiful.
You're a good-looking guy, if that's what you're worried about.
I thought you didn't even like me.
I do like you, Tao. You're funny. You care about your friends so loudly, without worrying what anyone else might think, and that's really cool.
Tao learning to trust Nick. It's a work in progress. Like, it takes some time because for a very long time, obviously, Tao did not trust him. And I'm sure he still holds some ill will towards him. All of Tao's preconceived notions about Nick and the fact that he was the last to know and just how everything progressed, how everything proceeded with that, Tao clearly still has some negative feelings toward Nick. But at this moment, he gets to see the Nick that Charlie sees. He gets to see this just honest, genuine, kind person. And in this moment when Tao is ragging on himself, Nick is the one who reassures him. It's not Charlie, his best friend. It's not, in the show, Isaac, who's also his good friend. It's Nick who reassures him. And even though Tao also leaves that scene very quickly to go to the vending machine, the mood is very different, obviously, because it's clear that they have had a moment of connection, and I love that for them.
I'm gonna go get something from the vending machine. Isaac, you coming?
Yeah, sure.
Back to the comics, so Tao hurries off. Nick is looking at a picture of Charlie and hearing the voice in his head, sometimes it's worth taking a risk. So then Charlie comes out of the shower and notices that Tao is gone, is like, what happened? And Nick's like, I tried to talk to him about Elle, but I majorly fucked it up. And Charlie's like, it's not your fault. He's really, really stubborn. It's kind of how I felt when I still thought you were straight. And Nick says, really? And Charlie just looks fondly down at him with his hair all wet and a towel around his shoulders. And he musses Nick's hair with his hands. And Nick laughs and then takes Charlie by the sides and holds him there for a second. And Charlie's like, what? And then Nick hugs him and just whoomp, just pulls him down onto the bed with him.
Did you just post another photo of me on Instagram?
I might have.
What?
And they have a lovely moment where, like, Nick tries to squash him and Charlie's like, Nick, oh my god, you giant rugby idiot. Nick's like, haha, now you're trapped here forever. And wraps him up in the covers from the bed and says, now you have to sleep in my bed. And Charlie says, that would probably be a bad idea.
Oh my god, Nick, you giant rugby idiot. You are fully trapped. Now you have to sleep in my bed.
It's probably a bad idea.
Now, it's interesting the possible interpretations of this line in the show versus the comics, because Charlie saying that would probably be a bad idea here makes perfect sense because they haven't told Tao yet. Tao does not know yet that they are together. So obviously them sharing a bed would kind of clue Tao in. But in the show, it begs the question of why does Charlie think it would be a bad idea for them to, share a bed together at this point? Because Tao knows, Isaac knows. The interpretation that you would think would be like, they might be tempted to do something together or something like that, or they would not be able to stop kissing each other or keep their hands off each other, which would make sense. Like, if you're sharing a room with two of your best friends, you probably don't want to be making out or doing anything more than that while they're sleeping in the next bed. So I guess you can interpret it that way, but if you have any other interpretations, let me know in the comments. So Nick and Charlie start kissing, and in the show we have the whole running through line of the challenge that Nick cannot resist kissing Charlie, and this is where Charlie declares that Nick has lost the challenge. They're kissing and kissing and kissing, and Nick says, you taste like toothpaste, like the first time we kissed at your house. And Charlie says, well, I have literally just brushed my teeth, so.
You taste like toothpaste. Like the first time we kissed at your house.
When I literally just have brushed my teeth, so...
And then Nick starts kissing his neck, and Charlie's like, so, what are you doing? And Nick says, kissing your neck, is that okay? And Charlie's like, obviously. And Nick says, I thought so.
So, is that okay?
Yeah.
And Charlie's just like, oh my god. While Nick is kissing his neck, he says, you really are obsessed with me. And Nick says, maybe a bit. And then Charlie's looking at the door, and he's like, Nick, we're gonna get caught. We should stop.
Nick, we should stop. We're gonna get caught.
And this does make sense in both the comics and the show, because in the comics, they're afraid of Tao catching them and finding out about their relationship that way. But in the show, they're just worried about being caught, in a compromising position by their friends, which would be potentially embarrassing. So Nick kind of crawls off of him and is like, yeah, you're right. Haha, whoops. And they both like sit there and look in opposite directions. And Charlie's like, that's probably not how we should come out to Tao. And Nick says, definitely not. And then Charlie leans his head on Nick's shoulder and laughs.
Yeah. I think you lost the challenge.
In the comics, then we jump to the next day with the discovery of the hickey on Charlie's neck. Yeah, so in the show, episode 4 ends with this scene, which is Charlie discovering that his activities with young Nicholas have led to a mark on his neck, also known as a love bite or hickey. So we have Charlie brushing his teeth the next morning, and he sees the hickey and he says, "Oh fuck." And I do love how they cut this in the show. Great editing there. And just in general, a really good episode. Episode 4 is definitely one of my favorites. It's so hard because season 2, like, all the episodes were just so good. And season 1 as well. So that's where we will end this episode of Heartstopper Comics vs. Show. And my recording, at least, is almost 45 minutes long. So good luck me with editing. So, yeah, what do you think about this part of the comics and this part of the show? Is there anything that you like better in the comics or better in the show? What are your thoughts about the changes made? Do you agree with all the changes made? Personally, as I've said before, I tend to appreciate both in different ways. Like, comics is good for one reason, show is good for another reason. Both good, just different. There are some things that I prefer a little bit more in comics or show, but for the most part, they're both great. They're different things. So let me know your thoughts. And yeah, that's, yeah. And before we get into thanking the patrons, a reminder that I have books and you can buy them. So my queer young adult novels, Dreamers and The Boy Who Was Kissed, just recently came out. Happy Pride. It's no longer Pride Month as I'm posting this, but it's the last day of Pride today, so I can still say it. Haha. I mean, I can say it anytime because, you know, yeah, you should buy them because they're good books. And if you buy them, please, if you read these books and enjoy them, please consider leaving a review on Amazon and Goodreads so that other people can find the books and read them. All right, well, thank you so much for watching and liking and subscribing and commenting and all the great things that you do. And huge thanks to our patrons who are so very amazing and so very wonderful and great and awesome and every other good word in the world. Special shout out to our Nick Nelson members, Kelly Walker, Paul Z, Kent Smither, Kim Engel, Lauren Javier, and Mark Walker. All right, that's going to do it for today. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night or whatever time of day it may happen to be, and I'll see you next time. Okay? Bye. Feel the room get colder. You can rest your head on my shoulder. Okay. Feel the room get colder.